Welcome to another episode of Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions, and today we're going to be talking about green coffee. What goes into our green coffee buying decisions? How do we know which coffee to buy? What are we looking out for? And all the intricacies and also the complications of what that looks like, especially for a small roasting company like us. So let's get right into it, but first off,
pour it up.
That's right. What is this?
This is a Ethiopian Bonko roasted by Bold Bean. Good friend of mine that I started in coffee with. Both had our first job at a cafe, and now he's the lead roaster at Bold Bean, so I'm pretty pumped about that.
Nice. That's awesome.
Super good. Good acidity. It's pretty clean.
Yeah. What I love about it is that's really clean.
Really clean.
Just nice clarity. It's not dirty at all. It's got a nice mouthfeel. It's great.
Yeah. And to all Chemex haters, this is not a Chemex. This is a Kalita brewer. 185 brewer, just the carafe.
Yes. That's great. Yeah, actually, it's probably one of my favorite. Maybe it's because at my first coffee roastery job, this is the brewer that we had at the roastery, and so we would always brew up, whatever we were roasting, the SO, in the roastery. And I just remember just come in and you just grind up some coffee, brew a little at your own pace. It's not like a cafe where you go in, you dial in some shots, or you're taking over somebody's shift, and you're like, dude, let's go. You just come into the roastery, brew up a cup of joe, you're sipping on it, go and do some minor paperwork, some distribution, shipping stuff, and it's great. I love it.
But, it had a very chill vibe.
Yeah,
it was a good place.
Yeah, it felt so having this felt nostalgic, and then I got it for my birthday, which I was pretty jazzed about, and now I just love brewing with it. I'm still kind of getting used to the flat base bottom brewer. I'm a huge long-term I'm not a Chemex fan. A V60 brewer kind of person. But yeah, it's been really interesting experimenting with that. But solid brew though.
Yeah, I like that on this one. I feel like the holes are a little bit bigger on the bottom than a traditional Kalita.
Yes, and a couple other things like the mound in the middle of the brewer allows for the filter to sit higher. And so when the water just comes through the filter, it right away disperses down into a little valley around the edge, which then just allows the water to get away instead of what I notice on my normal Kalita wave, the stainless steel one. Those are sometimes the filter will clog up the holes.
Yeah, totally.
And run into some problems. So
yeah,
but so we're just gonna get right into it. Something that we were just talking about actually earlier today was that there are some complications of buying green coffee in general. It's a big job. It's got lots of responsibilities with it, but also there's some difficulties of doing that in a small roasting company setting where first off, we don't have all the budget in the world, but then we also don't have all the business in the world. We don't have 100 wholesale account cafes, and we're not doing big volumes, so that causes some issues. Give me some of your thoughts. What have you noticed? And
yeah, I think referring to what you just said earlier, the type of business you have and basically the demand for your coffee plays a big role in deciding factor in what green you can afford. So if you're not selling a lot of coffee, you can't have 10 different SOs on your, you know what I mean, your menu. You can't. You can't afford that, but two, your coffee is going to get old. It's like you roast a batch, and if it doesn't sell, what are you going to do with it after 2 weeks, right? So there's that struggle and trying to hand pick certain coffees specifically with the idea that you enjoy them, but also the idea that your demographic would enjoy them because you have to sell coffee, right? So there's that tension because every coffee that we cup, we can personally enjoy to a degree. But even if we enjoy it, if that coffee doesn't sell, then you can't really buy it. You know what I mean? So that's the tension there. But then on top of that, you want to support certain people, certain importing companies. and you want to help them by buying their coffee and being able to distribute their coffee throughout, wholesale accounts. But again, if that coffee isn't selling, you can't really do anything about that. And I think that's a pretty big struggle in the deciding factor, because we've tasted some amazing coffees, but we can't buy them all.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, although oftentimes in the specialty coffee niche group of, the specialty coffee community, that's steadily and quickly, I think, also growing, is that like what we talk about flavors, we want the geishas, the naturals, the anaerobics, but that's not always feasible. I mean, for bigger companies, that might be doable. Yeah. For us, we kind of have to take a step back and say, hey, how much money do we have? How much money can we spend into it? Or how much money do we need to allocate to marketing and other things that can grow the business outside of just having spectacular coffee? But those coffees also cost a premium, and they should cost a premium. Yeah. By no means am I saying we should be buying coffee. They shouldn't be as expensive. They should be, because they're great, spectacular coffees. But we also have to realize is like, we can't just have, 3 coffees in our menu and one of those coffees being pretty darn expensive, a geisha, a natural, and have such a big upfront expense. But also, like you said, like, if we roast, a 10-pound batch and it doesn't sell out in the next 2-3 weeks because it's a little bit more expensive and, may not fit the general demographic. Like, there's so much conflict and tension and all of that you just can't be ignorant to. And you have to actually think about, like, be intentional and smart with your green coffee buying decisions. And so there's a lot of struggles in that. And so even just today, like when we're talking about investing into more green, and I actually just got an email from an importer the other week that said, hey, we have a nice Costa Rican geisha natural. Would you want to pick it up? It's not on the list. Like, and I'm like, yes, but I don't know if it's feasible right now. I don't know if we're going to be able, I don't know if that's a smart move, because we also need to grow as a roasting company. So, and oftentimes a lot of people will come up to me and be like, hey, when are you guys getting your first geisha? Or, when's the anaerobic coffee's coming, or stuff like that. And I'm like, man, like ASAP, because I do want them. And they're tasty, but that it has to be sustainable, and you got to be smart. So, apart from, that's like the business aspect of things. And, there's a lot of things that maybe we can cover on a different episode that goes through a lot of those details and nuances of buying green coffee, working with importers, and why we choose to work with specific people. But today, I want to talk about the fun stuff. The tasty goodness. Like we just talked about geisha naturals. Are you a geisha fan?
Of course. They're super interesting coffees. One of my first intriguing experiences at Verve was a geisha. So, and it blew me away. I was like, why am I paying $13 for this pour over? And then I tasted it and I'm like, dude, this is like watermelon juice, like so much complexity, so clean. So definitely a fan. But once again, I don't even know, like when you have a cupping table and you have a geisha on the table, you have a couple of naturals and then some washed coffees. They're all different, and I would say they're all tasty. So how do you cup those coffees and then don't just take that idea of like, man, it's a geisha, I should choose that geisha over a very clean, very good cup of coffee, but it's not a geisha.
Yes, for sure. And actually, a funny thing you said that is we've actually cupped and tasted some geisha coffees that we actually were like, I don't know if I can't just, it's not quite there, it's not a bad coffee, but I'm like, we've tasted some washed coffees that were more complex, more beautiful, and more that attracted us and drew us to this coffee than, a geisha natural or, geisha in general, and so, geishas are great, and, naturals are great, and aerobic coffees are great. Honey processed is great. Recently, we've actually stumbled across a spectacular honey processed coffee that, man, hopefully will be landing in the roastery in just a matter of months. But who knows? Don't want to spill the beans too early, literally, figuratively.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to talk about some of the things that we look for in a cupping. You know, like you said, like how do we cup a lot of different coffees, and we get samples. Sometimes we're cupping, 10, 15 different samples when we're choosing about which coffee to buy. And because we have to be smart with how we're buying coffee, because we're not a big, massive coffee company, we have to be intentional with what we're buying. Dude, we have to make every single dollar account for the coffees that we're investing in. And so I want to talk about sweetness, acidity, complexity, mouthfeel, and body.
Yeah.
But before we just go all out on it, tell me, what is some of the characteristics that jump out to you the most, and what do you kind of have your ears open to, or your palate open to?
Yeah, right off like the bat in the beginning, the dry smells. As soon as I can smell sweetness, it just sticks in my mind. Like there's something about the aromas of like that almost, I don't want to say the stereotype of like chocolatey, but richness. And I think a lot of the times in my mind, I'm affiliating richness with chocolate because chocolate sauce or syrup is heavy, but there's this richness in the smell. Yeah. And as soon as I smell those dry smells, I mark in my mind, okay, I should, keep my eyes on that. And then second part is basically like the complexity of the smell and the dry smell, especially like florals stick out to me a lot because they're diverse. You know what I mean? It doesn't just smell like a fruit. There's something else going on in there, like a bouquet of flowers, literally, florals. So dry smells are like my first thing. Like, okay, and I'm making mental basically like check marks. Okay, that's that. This is okay. This is very complex. This is, I don't know, we'll have to figure out later.
Yeah, the crazy thing that you're bringing up dry smells and smells in general, maybe at the bloom when you're cupping, the wet smells we call them. The crazy thing was that I used to, at my first roastery job, I worked with a guy named Shay, and he's extremely knowledgeable, just wonderful guy, so much to learn from him. And I remember cupping him some of the first times, and he'll go around, he'll take aroma smells, and he has all of his notes. And he's like, yeah, I have all the notes of the coffee. And then, of course, that wasn't the case all the time, but, when we'd go on slurping and sipping, and he's like, yep, I got that off the aromas. And I'm like, that's wild. Yeah. The aromas have so much insight into the coffee. Yeah. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, because a lot of that has to do with how we perceive taste. Majority of our perception comes through smell. Like when we smell something, we taste something. That's why you can come up with like, man, that tastes like dirt. Have you eaten dirt or something? You know what I mean? Maybe you have, but the smell of dirt. You know what I mean? That earthiness. Like it's not necessarily a taste. It's more of a smell, but you can perceive it.
Yeah, or like when we're cupping coffee, then we'll sometimes like, oh man, that smells hay-like.
Yeah.
Or that tastes hay-like, that tastes green. Like, have you tasted, have you tried anything green? What's green? Well, we know it's kind of like unripe, lacking a lot of sweetness and color. Yeah. Really, it's like a desaturated taste. What else are you looking for? So you did your aromas as we're cupping. What's next?
Yeah, so in cupping, I think the main things are tasting coffee like fairly hot in the beginning of the cupping, and then tasting coffees as they cool. That will tell you the quality and the progression of the green. So in the beginning, with taste, I follow up with sweetness right away too. Like, does this now, I smelled it smelled sweet, but does this actually taste sweet? But that's a fairly general one because sweetness can be pretty diverse. You can have sweet acidity, or you can have sweet, quote unquote, bitterness. You know what I mean? Like a dark chocolate versus a milk chocolate. They're in the same category, but one is sweeter than the other, right? Or you can have like like people compare like a Mayer lemon to a regular lemon to a lime. Yeah. They're very close, or grapefruit. They're very close citric acidity, but some of it is sweeter, some of it is a little sharper. You know what I mean? So then tracking that kind of sweetness from there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't have much to say. Sweetness is sweetness, and that's honestly that's also something that one of my biggest things that I'm looking out for as well. Like I love a good sweet coffee. Like if there's, and it's hard to do that with when you're cupping samples. That's one of the difficult things about green coffee buying is that when you're sample roasting on a small sample roaster, a drum roaster, or an Ikawa, which is what we have, it's like that small electric roaster, those roasts can only do so much. You know, and so you can have like a really spectacular sample roast that's giving you a lot of information, that's kind of reproducing the full potential of the coffee. But most of the time, sample roasts are not the full potential of the coffee. You're just getting a glimpse into it. And then you kind of have to, through tasting, through, regularly tasting and cupping, you have to kind of be like, oh, okay, this coffee has more potential. We can take this coffee somewhere. And sometimes you taste coffees and you're like, I just don't quite see it. And the scary thing is sometimes, depending on if it's a really great or bad sample roast, you might, push away a coffee that's actually spectacular. But on the cupping table, it just turned out pretty bad. And that's the scary thing about it.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the other characteristics of coffee, like complexity and clarity, it's another thing. Like it could very well be like a bad roast, but you have to like perceive and like, I don't want to say guess, but have this educated understanding of like, okay, that's a roast defect. It's not a green defect. And more or less, you'll switch from cupping for flavor and all that, cupping for defect, which those are two different things. Most Q graders are cupping for defect at origin, where we're cupping to choose a coffee based on flavor or quality of the green. You know what I mean? There's a little like crossover, but for the most part, they're pretty different. And that's where you can basically understand that, man, this coffee, like you were saying, it has potential or this coffee doesn't. So I think from going from like sweetness, the next thing I would be looking for is like body. Because those kind of affiliate together, sweeter coffees. And this is, once again, not absolute, but I feel like sweeter coffees tend to have more body and then follow up with having more aftertaste or that lingering taste. Sometimes you walk away from a cupping table and you can still taste the coffee in your mouth. You're like, I haven't slurped for like 5 minutes. I still can taste this coffee. And that's a very, very good coffee in my eyes.
Yeah, for sure. And that's also why I think oftentimes you'll see naturals have a bigger body taste to them because they're oftentimes so sweet. They have such a rich, upfront sweet fruitiness to them that, man, you're like, man, this is really big, as opposed to, maybe more tea-like coffees. Which, then again, I want to kind of transition into what are you looking for other than sweetness and body, but like how do you judge like a natural on the table that's fruity, sweet, upfront in your face, and a tea-like delicate, maybe some nice acidity in there, because we've had both of those coffees on the cupping table.
Especially if you're cupping blindly. In my opinion, you can really see the difference between a natural and a washed. And the reason I bring those processing methods up, because you said like a natural processed coffee that has more body, and then usually like a washed Ethiopian has less body, it's like quote unquote tea-like. You can spot the difference in clarity. Like in my opinion, a lot of natural coffees, they taste great. They're so like bold. I hate using that word, but you know what I mean? They're straight in your face. Like they hit you with that blueberry flavor, that strawberry jam flavor. They're so big, but they lack that clarity. You know what I mean? They're all over the place. They coat your mouth fully, but you can't really distinguish like, oh, that's that, that's that, that's that. When you take a nice clean washed coffee, you're still having various flavors jumping all over, but they're very distinct. You know what I mean? You're tasting like this coffee. Like I knew I was tasting lemongrass. It was pretty distinct. It was different than any Ethiopian naturals that we've been cupping because of that distinction and clarity.
For sure, and but once again, like these are not absolutes. Especially in the last 5 years, I think coffee is changing so fast, and there's so many producers out there that are getting so just freaking good at what they're doing, and farmers, and all of a sudden now you can get strawberry jammy, coffees from Colombia, and you can get chocolatey coffees from Africa.
Yeah.
Like there's so much, things are changing so fast. But that being said, like, washed coffee, like, naturals can have more body than washed, but washed coffees can have more body than naturals. We've
Yeah.
seen that before.
Yeah.
So being open to the unexpected, because really anything can happen. And I like that you brought up clarity, because I would agree, like a lot of naturals, I think, lack that clarity in flavor, which for me, I also kind of push that over to complexity. When I'm like, oh man, that coffee is just not complex enough. I'm not saying that that coffee doesn't have enough flavor. It's not sweet enough. No, coffee can be sweet. A coffee can have beautiful body, but the complexity is being able to taste the clarity within. It's like if you were to take a piece of the pie and cut 4 pieces, and instead of like grabbing a spatula, you can clearly take out one slice. A coffee with like less clarity and less complexity, you're taking it off and it's kind of dragging the other pieces off.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're like, I just want that, that complexity and the clarity. So,
or it's like buying, that cheesecake from Costco, and it has all the slices of like different flavors, chocolate, the caramel cheesecake, like all the flavors there, and making sure that like every part is distinct on its own. It has complexity and clarity, and when it has both, that's a very dynamic cup of coffee. It has a lot to offer. So I definitely value that but I would say that's on my latter side of deciding on a coffee. It's more or less, there's like, for me, like a pyramid of like, okay, does it have the basics? And then I start basically guessing on, or not guessing, but taking assumptions of like, okay, this tastes more this way and this tastes more this way. But it's on the bottom of my pyramid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It's not the most important thing.
For sure. That complexity is also I've noticed is that a really beautiful washed coffee will have complexity, sweetness, body, clarity, and that's not to say that naturals are worse than washed, but that's the beauty of cupping and choosing specific coffees to match what you personally like and your flavor preference, and being able to serve these beautiful, wonderful coffees. And I don't know if we covered all of the things. We also didn't cover mouthfeel and tactile, which is a big one. We don't have very much time. Let's get to it. So mouthfeel, I'm a huge sucker for mouthfeel, and all the time, oftentimes in our cupping notes or on the bag, it'll say reminds us of, and it'll be say creamy, velvety, because how the coffee sits in your mouth is also extremely important and a big part of experiencing the coffee, not just tasting it.
Yeah. And I would say that's one that most is like very, very general. Most people will say, man, that coffee is smooth. Well, that's a tactile.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how it feels in your mouth. It's smooth, it goes down easy, it's drinkable. And that's very, very important. You know what I mean? But I also think that has to do with quality acidity in the coffee. So if some coffees have a very poor quality of acidity and it's very sharp, it's not as pleasant when you have something with I'm a sucker for malic acidity. Oh, yeah. Something that has a very nice malic acidity, like grape and apple, coats your mouth, it rests there, it's velvety. I'm a sucker for that. That's like my ultimate. A coffee with nice malic acidity, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of malic acidity. I think it's kind of unpleasant, so to speak, but I know you're a huge fan of that, and that's something that we're always cupping, and I'm like, dude, that coffee just has too much acidity, not enough sweetness, and you're like, oh, that's spectacular, I'll take that,
Nice muscadine grape.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's honestly Sergey's favorite flavor note to throw out there. Man, I didn't realize that we could talk so much about flavor profiles. There's so much more to say, and maybe we'll do a follow-up part 2 to this. But those are a lot of the things that we kind of have to juggle with when we're buying green coffee. But also, taking all those things and bouncing off our preferences, and making sure we enjoy the coffees, but also realizing are the people buying our coffee going to enjoy this coffee?
Yeah.
And that's a big one, especially when we're actually roasting coffee for people to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And if our demographic or our community of people that buy coffee from us. If they don't like it, then maybe we just need to wait on it, for another time.
For sure.
And that's appropriate. And finding that balance between those two is a big deal. So, man, super good conversation. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching this conversation about flavor profiles. Hopefully I didn't nerd too much of you guys out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching once again, and we'll see you guys in the next one.